Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We are live on August 22nd, and today's webinar is Fundamentals of Developing a Tribal Nonprofit, Part 4. It will be presented by Vince Franco. My name is Wissa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center, and today I will be your webinar facilitator. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. If you look at the top of your screen, you will see an icon of either a person with their hand raised or just a hand. With that icon, you can either raise hand, agree, disagree, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to this graphic here. To the bottom left, you will see a box that says Files. Here you will find today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Simply click the item you would like to download, then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save onto your device. Once the item is downloaded, it should appear in your device's download section. The second box labeled Web Links is where you will find our survey about today's webinar with any other links that will be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, to the right of the screen, we have a chat box available. This is how you will communicate with the instructor and NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. Simply type your message and hit enter or click that up arrow icon button to submit here. Please feel free to also submit your tech support issues. And with that being said, I would now like to introduce Vince Franco.
Hey, thank you for the nice warm welcome. Hopefully you can all hear me loud and clear. I'd like to say hello to Anthony and Christine and Howard and Jennifer and Juliet, aka 305. Welcome from 561, which is, area code speak. We are in session 4 of the 4-part series on building and maintaining a successful tribal nonprofit organization. So we're going to take this until we're done with this session today, and then I've got to move on to another training session for the Native Learning Center next week on grants management. But anyway, just a real quick recap on what we talked about. This is, as I mentioned, session 4 of 4. We're going to get into IRS determination in a minute, but I just want to kind of go back in time and refresh everyone's memory who was with me for some or all of those sessions. And if you're new to part 4 here, this is just a real quick recap. I don't have time to go back and rehash everything that we talked about, but I just want to remind everyone that if you did miss any of this, or if you just want a refresher, you can go to the Native Learning Center website. You can download the previous 3 presentations on nonprofit organization startup, as well as this one as well. Within about 24 hours, you should be able to do that. But going back on session 1, a whopping 3 weeks ago, we started with a startup, and I talked about different resources. I talked about the purpose, the vision, and the mission of an entity wanting to create a situation where they become incorporated and then eventually seek nonprofit status. That's the goal of what we were talking about here. And it's a process of going through different procedures. So day 1, I talked about creating your name of your organization and locking in on that name with the state that you're going to register with. And I talked about the fact that Florida is a very business-friendly state, so it's very easy, relatively easy process if you know what you're doing and you've done this before to navigate your way through the process of starting a nonprofit or a for-profit organization in the state of Florida. And I talked about how you can reach out to different departments of state. That's what it's commonly referred to in the different states that you might be living in, where you can do the same thing. There is a small fee for doing this. We're talking under $200 to do all of the things, the preliminary stuff, such as registering your name. And then the next thing we're going to talk about articles of incorporation. You would do that if you're an entity wanting to incorporate. Incorporation is a way, if you recall, to protect the assets, the revenues and the assets of the soon-to-be nonprofit organization, and separating those assets from your personal assets and the assets of any other anyone else involved in the entity wanting to become a nonprofit. So I talked about articles of incorporation, and I also talked about liability insurance as well. Those were the main talking points of session 1. Then in session 2, I got into internal structure. You've got to have either a board of directors or a board of commissioners, whatever you call it. It's kind of a personal choice of your leadership. You've got to have at least 3 directors if you're going to incorporate, if you're going to be a nonprofit. And I talked about quite a bit about how board of commissioners, board of directors should operate, what their obligations are. I talked about effective meetings. I talked about the difference between functional and dysfunctional leadership and meetings and that type of thing. I talked about organizational traits. I also talked about leadership characteristics and the legal obligations that board members have and that the organization must adhere to if it wants to be a nonprofit. That was part 2. Then part 3, I talked about fundraising considerations, as I call it, searching for revenue streams, creating revenue streams such as grants, federal grants, and how to go about doing that, searching, navigating, applying, and managing federal grants, as well as I talked about, hold on a second, my screen just went blank because I haven't been moving my mouse around enough. You know how that is. Okay. And I also talked about private sector funding, foundations, corporate entities. I also talked about some native-centric community groups that are out there, Shakopee in particular, that are very native-centric. They give millions of dollars to different native-focused nonprofits and even for-profit organizations, as long as they meet the criteria. And I suggested going to a couple different places, grants.gov, to look for public sector funding, those federal grants from the big agencies that are out there, Department of Labor, Department of Education, et cetera, on a federal level, and then candid.org, which is the new repository of grant opportunities on the private sector. It used to be the foundationcenter.org. Now it's Candid, CANDID.org, where you can go onto that online portal and look for opportunities on the private side. The corporate entities and the community centers and the foundations are all in that, and it's worth your time to look, create profiles in both of those repository portals, online portals, create a profile so that you get a stream of information from those organizations on opportunities, because you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to build a fundraising effort or campaign, whatever you want to call it. You're going to have to be able to put it together and be able to describe it, not just describe it for the IRS during your application process, but really show that it's ingrained in the organization, that you've got board minutes that show that the board of directors or board of commissioners approved it, along with all the other things, articles of incorporation, name that you are legitimate, you are moving in the right direction. Because what you're doing is you're building a portfolio of information, that legitimate information, legal information from the state and from these processes that I'm talking about, so that you can show the IRS a couple different things. And that's what we're going to get in today. We're going to get to be able to go through the process of showing the IRS that you're just more than a hobby. You don't, and that's a legitimate question. I don't mean that facetiously, and I don't really even mean it kiddingly. It's one of the things that, my accountant asked me when I wanted to start an LLC for this company that I'm doing right now. He said, "Are you is this going to be a hobby? Or are you really going to, do something with it? Are you going to generate revenue, profit, and all that? And of course, the short answers were, yeah, I'm going to do that. Same process here with the IRS. You want to show them that you've put together everything. You've got a team, basically your board of commissioners, and they put into motion all kinds of different legitimate and legal processes on a state level and even on a federal level, getting the employer identification number, to show the IRS that you are not just a hobby, that you are wanting to apply for nonprofit status, that you have a bona fide reason, nonprofit reason for getting that status as a charitable 501c3. Okay, now we're up to real time. We're going to go into session 4 here, go through this section, which is just as it says, working for the, putting this all together so you can go through the IRS process of making sure that you are ready and that you've shown the IRS that the type of organization that you are, so that you get the correct classification, so that you show them that you're not some of the things that have different IRS classification in the 501c category or the 501 category, such as a church or institution of higher learning. So that's what we're doing here. Okay, we go we're in the bottom right there. Part 4, IRS determination. I should have had the screen up as I was recapping what we accomplished over the past 3 sessions, 1, 2, 3, now 4. IRS nonprofit application questionnaire. It's not something I made up. This is the IRS questionnaire for nonprofits. It's an internal document, but you've got to be able to, they say it's an internal document, but you want to make sure you do it properly and hold on to it, because it's something you might have to show the IRS when you actually file for the nonprofit application, which is either the short form or hopefully, or the long form of the 501c3 nonprofit application, known as the 1023. 1023EZ is the short form, and then just the regular form 23 is the long form. We don't want to do the long form because it's just that, tremendously long, 30, 40, something ridiculously long, with a lot of questions and a lot of emphasis on you to provide information. So why not set yourself up by doing all these things that we talked about? They're not terribly complicated, they're not terribly expensive, but it takes some thought to put your articles of incorporation together, your bylaws, etc., to make sure putting together a fundraising plan. Those are all processes that need to be put in place. And then once you get that determination, the very last, not the last thing, but part of this process is state sales tax exemption, which is kind of the bonus. It's the icing on the cake. Why, if you're going to be a nonprofit, you want to take advantage of what nonprofit status means, and that is exemption from from tax, basically reduction of tax, or in some cases elimination of tax at least on a state level. So that's what we'll talk about to finish up here, state sales tax application process. But you got to have the 501c3 status to get it, right? All right, so let's move on. Again, if you have questions, concerns, comments, put them in the chat box. I'll try to keep an eye on it. I know Lisa will too. If I miss something, she'll bring it to my attention, but I always try to keep an eye on that. My left eye on the screen and my right eye on the chat box. All right, nonprofit application questionnaire. IRS nonprofit application questionnaire. After approval of incorporation, your articles have been approved, and the return of your filed articles of incorporation by the division of corporation, or whatever it's called in the state that you're applying for. Here in Florida, I think it is called the division of corporation. I'd have to go back and look at my actual articles, but I think it is called division of corporation. Same thing. Sometimes it's called Department of Revenue on a state level, which usually takes 30 to 60 days. These days, it's much quicker than that, folks. It's much quicker. You could do the application online, and as long as you pay the fee same day, the turnaround is much quicker than 30 to 60 days, more like a week. With my organization, it took about 5-6 working days to get what I needed, which was a bona fide, legitimate copy of my article signed off on a state level. All right. Keep in mind that you must file Form 1023, the short form or long form, within a certain period of time. It seems like a long time, 27 months, a little more than 2 years of the date that you are established as an incorporated entity. The date that you received, like for me, it was February 24th of 2022. The clock starts ticking. If I were a nonprofit, I'd have a 2-year window to follow through and make sure. Otherwise, you kind of get put on the back burner as far as the IRS is concerned. So you don't want to do that. You should, by the time you do what we've been talking about over the past 3 days, if you're doing that and thinking through that process and setting yourself up, you should be ready to submit go through the application process. You should have everything you need. It doesn't take that long to get this information. The biggest decision is who's going to be on your board of directors and how you're going to structure your internal operation, your bylaws. Thinking that through in advance is very, very helpful. That's what we talked about on day 2, that process. All right, so this slide here says an organization that seeks to be tax exempt charity. The word charity is often used by the IRS. Don't think of that of anything. Don't overthink it. Charity is just the word that they use. 501c3 charitable nonprofit organization is the phrase that the IRS uses. Under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, must apply for tax exemption status by preparing and filing one of 2 forms that I've been talking about. The hard way is the long form, which we want to try to avoid going in, or the easy way, basically the short form. The turnaround time, once the application is complete, the turnaround time for the short form, which makes perfect sense, is a lot quicker than the long form is. So to be eligible for the short form for tax exempt status under the 501c3, there are a series of questions. The organization must be able to answer no to each and every one of these questions coming up. There's 26 of them. We're going to go through each one of them as quickly as possible. Some of them won't make any sense at all. We'll move through them quickly. But, you're not a foreign entity trying to apply for nonprofit, for example. So we'll move through those things that are outside the realm of normalcy to move through this rather quickly. As it says there, the first 3 questions are the most critical, and they deal with potential income and assets. Let's get right into it. This is what it looks like. This is the form. It's simply a questionnaire. IRS nonprofit application questionnaire. That's what it's called. Form 1023-EZ eligibility worksheet must be completed prior to completing the short form, the 1023-EZ. And here's why. I have it easier to read. All right. Yeah, let's just look at this, and then I broke down every question. So this is what it looks like, except it's 26 questions. It's 3 or 4 pages. But let's look at each question individually, number 1, 2, and 3, all the way through 26. First question, you've got to be able to answer no to this. All of them, actually. Have your annual gross receipts exceeded $50,000 in any of the past 3 years? So they're going back 3 years, 2021, 20, and 19. If you're filing right now, they're going to go back to January 1st, 2019, and ask you, has your entity received receipts more than $50,000 in that 3-year period? They talk what they determine to be gross receipts, gross as in before deductions. Gross receipts are the total amounts the organization received from all sources during its annual accounting period, without subtracting any cost of expenses or reductions. You should consider this year to be the next 2 years prior. All right, so you got to answer no to that $50,000 threshold on income. And to go a little further, do you project that your annual gross receipts will exceed $50,000 in the next 3 years? 2023 being the first year, 24-25. So through December 31st, 2025, gross receipts less than $50,000. Now, practically speaking, for a new entity wanting to be a nonprofit, this is probably a moot point, probably a no-brainer that, they don't have that kind of revenue in the past, currently, or in the future for the next 3 years. So this should be easy. Now, but 50,000 is the threshold. If you think there's going to be receipts as an income more than $50,000 coming in the next 3 years, you may want to take a look at that, and because it could put you in jeopardy of filling out a long form instead of a short form. All right, so that's on income. That's on receipts. The next one, got to answer no to number 1 and number 2. Number 3 gets into assets. Do you have total assets with a fair market value in excess of $250,000? And then the second paragraph, there's the definition. Again, for a new entity wanting to be a nonprofit, this is probably a moot point. They probably don't have a bricks and mortar building yet. If they do, it probably is a storefront or something of lesser value if they're lucky enough to have that. Do you have fair market value of assets of $250,000 or more? Hopefully the answer is no. And for new organizations, new entities, this should be an easy no-brainer no. All right, you got to answer no to that one. Then the rest of it goes on. Different questions. So let's move from really, relatively quickly. A lot of these won't apply. Were you formed under the laws of a foreign country? Well, my guess is no. No. Again, no to this question as well. Is your mailing address in a foreign country? No. Are you controlled by an entity suspended under 501p? Suspension of taxes and status of terrorist organizations? Hard no, right? Are you organized as an entity other than a corporation, unincorporated association, or trust? If yes, are you organized as an LLC, which is a for-profit classification and not eligible for 501c3 status? That's what they're trying to make sure here. Are you affiliated with are you, not just affiliated, are you a nonprofit? No, you should answer no to this. You are an entity pursuing nonprofit status, correct? So you'd answer no to this. Whoops, jumped over 8. 8, were you previously revoked, or are you a successor to a previously revoked organization that was a nonprofit but somehow did something and their status was revoked? No to that. If you're a spin-off, so to speak, of an older approved profit that is now defunct. So you'd answer no to that. 9, are you currently recognized as tax exempt under another section of the Internal Revenue Service or 501A? Or were you previously exempt, like in question 8, were you previously exempt under another status? You'd answer no to this, that you weren't currently recognized as tax exempt. The whole reason we're here is we're new and we're starting, putting the entity together and seeking nonprofit organization status. So you'd answer no to that as well. Are you a church or a convention, or are you a faith-based? That's what the IRS calls church and these other organizations that are affiliated with a religion. They call them faith-based organization. And it's a different classification, right? So you'd answer no, you're not a church, nor are you a hospital or a medical research organization. You'd answer no to that. Again, different classification of nonprofit. All right. Are you a school or a university? Now here, they're not talking about a situation where you might be giving scholarships or stipends to an organization for educational purposes. They are saying, are you a dedicated full-time institution of higher learning? The answer is going to be no, because if you were a school or a college or a university, you'd have a totally different career path. You'd have something, you'd be not in this category at all. So you'd answer no. Then it gives some definitions here defining what a school is or an institution of higher learning. It says those entities present formal instruction as their primary function, not just as the purpose of giving scholarships or stipends. They have regularly scheduled curriculum, and they develop curriculum, or they pay for it, or they host some kind of curriculum building process. They have a regular faculty or adjunct instructors and teachers, subject matter experts, those kind of things. And they hire them, either pay them directly or indirectly, but they have a full roster, of those subject matter experts. Have regularly enrolled student body, right? Also has a place where educational activities regularly are carried on, either a bricks and mortar or an online process or virtual process on a regular basis. The term school includes primary, secondary, preparatory, high school, colleges, university, religious. It does not include organizations engaged in both educational and non-educational activities. My educated guess is all of you should answer no to this. You are not an institute, and that's the phrase. It's the institution of higher learning, of higher education. I'm sorry, institution. IHE, Institution of Higher Education, is the classification they have. So you'd answer no to that. You're not a college. Are you an agricultural research organization? No, that's a different classification. Are you applying for exemption as a cooperative hospital? Again, back to the hospital reference. No. They have 3 or 4 things related to medical. Hospitals, HMOs, those type of things. This is the second one, cooperative hospital service organization. That's a good one. Are you applying for exemption as a cooperative service agreement, cooperative educational organization? That's a different it's a 501 app, different classification. So you'd answer no to that. Are you applying for exemption as a qualified charitable risk pool? A risk pool is organized and operated only to pool insurance risk. So you're in the insurance arena. No, so you'd answer no to that. Hopefully you're not into insurance risk pool activities. Or 17, are you requesting classification as a supporting organization? A supporting organization provides grants similar to a private foundation. Foundations have a different classification than 501c3. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that I referenced a couple times, and a lot of those other foundations, have different tax structures, have different operational processes. Their tax burden is much higher than that of a 501c3, which is what you're pursuing here. 501c3 charitable nonprofit is, when it comes to tax burden, is at the lowest end, the bottom level of tax burden as far as nonprofit entities. And foundations are more at the top end. They have much more burden. Anthony says, what if you are affiliated with or employed by a university but are creating a nonprofit that is separate? Well, there's the clue. Separate from the university itself. In other words, if you're separate in that, Anthony, you have your own, or will have your own board of directors, your own financial structure, your own fundraising, your own articles, then you are truly a separate entity. Even though part of your operation is maybe housed in the university, that's very common. That's referred to as an incubator process, where the university provides kind of like room and board, but you are a separate entity with your own board of directors, your own articles. If you have those things or are planning to, then you are a separate candidate for what we're talking about here. And you would answer no to those questions I think it was question 14, the institution of higher learning. I hope that gives some indication to your question there. It sounds like you're not going to be affiliated. Yeah, no problem. All right, let's keep going here. It's a good question because it comes up often. There's a lot of misconceptions about schools. A lot of nonprofits that really aren't schools think that they are, or fear for it but really they're separate entities. They're more charitable organizations with their own independent operation, and they're not schools in the way that the IRS defines them, which is good, right? All right, let's continue on in this elimination process. Process of elimination is what it is, exactly what we're doing. 18, is a substantial portion of your activities to provide assistance to individuals through credit counseling. No, now we're moving, that's more loan, that's more banking, that's more credit union type of activities with their own classification. Credit counseling would be tied into that. Does a tribal CDFI fall into that category? Perhaps, maybe, but I would think that they'd be able to justify the fact that, you know, they are also a CDFI, but they are also a nonprofit. So, but if you're planning on being a CDFI, you know, we're going to need to have a separate conversation about that, because that's a different type of animal that is kind of in a gray area. And we're not talking about that here. We're talking about more of the traditional charitable 501c3 nonprofit status that most nonprofits are looking for and get approved for. 19, we only got 26, so we got only 7 more to go. 19, do you sell or intend to sell carbon credits or carbon offsets? I'm not even sure I know what that is. I think that has to do with alternative energies. No, that would be more, you know, when you get into that realm of wind power and solar power and geothermal and alternative energy processes, as far as I know, those are all for-profit entities and structures, and that's the way the IRS looks at it. So, you know, that's a whole nother thing, a very complicated thing with net metering and all those, you know, kind of things. Here we deal with FPL, Florida Power and Light, who is, my understanding, is not real friendly when it comes to this type of alternative energy concepts. It's not the same across the country. But anyway, that's a for-profit entity in pursuit, not what we're talking about here today. Neither. Here's the third area of health, and that's HMOs. No, still not in that area. Are you account care, ACO organization that engages in or intends to engage in ACO activities, Medicare, Medicaid, all of those senior retirement optional things that the federal government gets into, or has different healthcare organizations involved in it, like Aetna, you know, just to name one. It doesn't sound to me like this group that we're talking here is in the health arena looking to be an HMO or cater to Medicare and Medicaid services. So you would answer no to that. 22, do you maintain or intend to maintain one or more donor advised funds? Donor advised funds are for the foundations, the 501c6 organizations, the Bill and Melinda Gates, and the other foundations have. If you recall, we talked about this on Tuesday when we were talking, or Wednesday, last week Tuesday, when we were talking about fundraising, and I was talking about the qualifications of foundations. Most of the money that they work with is donor-driven, donor-advised funds that they have to honor. It says a donor-advised fund is a fund that is owned by the organization but has advisory privileges controlled by the donor, which makes sense. That's what foundations do a lot of. Donor advised funds are typical of private foundations, which have classification that is much more stringent, as I alluded to, than the 501c3. There are 501c6, which has a different tax burden, very, very rigid tax burden, and something we don't want to go into. We don't want to be a foundation. And, you know, there's a lot of misconception. I was watching something on TV the other day, and it was some show. I don't even recall what it was. And one of the characters was saying, I got to create a foundation. And I turned to my wife and said, no, you don't want to create a foundation. The tax burden is way out of control. You want to create a charitable nonprofit 501c3 nonprofit. And she looked at me, you know, just burst out laughing. I'm like, hey, you know, this is what I do. I, you know, talk about this kind of stuff all the time. You know, no, you don't want to be a foundation unless you absolutely, you know, that's a different structure. and tax burden, let alone everything that they do. They can only work with the funds that they raise through investments, and then they have an obligation to give that money away based on the donor's suggestions or protocols. So no, we would answer no to this. Short answer is no. 23, are you organized and operate exclusively for testing public safety? That's a whole nother area, car safety, all kinds of different OSHA related things. No, that, OSHA is what they call a quasi government, it's a division of Department of Labor, and they have all kinds of contracts with safety organizations that do nothing but construction safety issues for commercial and residential construction. No, the short answer to that is no, you're not trying to be OSHA and their safety protocols. 24, are you requesting classification as a private? Here we are with a foundation again. No, we are not a foundation. You would not want to be a foundation. It's a much more structured, rigid tax situation. No, you'd answer no to this. 2 more. Are you applying for reinstatement? Hopefully not. Hopefully you're new to this, approaching this the first time, fresh, you're small, you're new, you don't have the assets, you don't have the revenue or the gross receipts as they're called. You are not reinstating from a defunct previous organization, whether it was profit or nonprofit. No, you'd answer no to this. And the last one, are you applying for retroactive reinstatement of exemption? Here's that 27-month thing that I talked about at the very beginning. No, it's not reinstatement. You didn't forget. You're within the window of time, that 2+ year time frame to apply. This retroactive is kind of like missing a ratification instead of a resolution for tribal council. You always want to try to do it in advance, right? That's the resolution, rather than after the fact, go back and try to get something retroactively. No, you would answer no. This is the first attempt at it. And, answering no to all 26 of these is the key. Jumped over a slide there. IRS would be eligible for IRS Form 1023 for tax exemption status under the 501c3 classification. An organization must be able to answer all 26 of those questions as a no. You're not going to be a foundation. You're not going to be an HMO. You're not going to be a church or a faith-based organization. You're not going to be a foundation. You're not going to be a healthcare organization. You're not going to be a foreign entity or apply for application through a foreign entity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Answering yes to any of those questions will result in the organization having to complete the long form, which is what you don't want to do. So what you want to do is print this form out. You can Google it. You can go to irs.gov if you wish. You can download the IRS application for 1023, the Form 1023 application questionnaire on the irs.gov website. You can download it, and I would literally do that and print it out if you wish, or electronic. I don't think the IRS provides fillable PDFs, so you're probably going to have to do it old school, print it out, and actually put it can they try to apply for tax exemption status without setting up a nonprofit entity? Well, Christine, short answer, long answer. Short answer is tribes are already nonprofit organizations. Their sovereignty alone qualifies them for nonprofit status, and they are recognized by the IRS as being nonprofit. And I'm going to put something in the chat box here for you to check. Make sure I got it. Yep. They are, just the numbers here, they are classified by the IRS as what's called a 7871. So instead of being a 501c3, which is the most readily recognized tax exempt status in the country, they are automatically qualified for what's recognized by the IRS as a 7871. You can write that down. You can Google it. You can go to irs.gov and you can look into it. Can the tribe apply for tax exempt status without setting up a nonprofit? Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm answering your question again. Yes, they are nonprofits already. And here's the rub, though. There's a rub with this, Christine. Good question. Really good question. Tribes are automatically nonprofits because they're sovereign nations. So they automatically have that classification. But on a practical basis, the problem is that the philanthropic community as a whole across the United States, on the public side and on the private side, simply don't understand what a 7871 sovereign nation nonprofit status means. They don't understand it. What they do understand and what they accept is the traditional classification of nonprofit as a 501c3. Example, when you go to any of the corporate entities or any of the foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or any of them to look for grant applications, it's all done online these days, of course, and the first question they're going to ask you is, are you a 501c3? Now, if you answer no because you have tribal nonprofit, the 7871, if you have tribal nonprofit, you're going to be kicked out of the program because they don't understand it, they don't recognize it. So there's a short answer and a long answer to your question. The short answer is yes, tribes are nonprofit. The longer answer is yeah, they're nonprofits, but unfortunately in the philanthropic community, it's just not recognized for what it is. So a lot of tribes and tribal entities like housing authorities, TDAGs, pursue 501c3 because they know from research and from training like this that is the most recognizable system out there for donations, for federal grants and private funding, that type of thing, and for making their own decisions. 501c3, as you learned from the prior 3 days, have their own board of directors or commissioners. Sometimes they're assigned individuals from the tribe. Okay, I know of tribal nonprofits that tell me that there are tribal members that are assigned to be board members, and that might be the case. But theoretically, they make their own decisions. They have their own boards. They generate their own revenue. They have their own tax identity, so on. So short answer and long answer. Good, really, really good question with some detail. I would look up the 7871. That's tribal sovereignty from an IRS standpoint. Okay. Now, according to the IRS, following the traditional format of 501c3, you answer no to all 26 of those questions. I was saying, print out the form, and go through them. Make sure you answer no to all the questions and keep it, just like with your bylaws. Keep it. That's an internal document. You're going to need it. Just have it. Scan it if you want. Create an electronic version of it. Keep it handy. Because you never know what the IRS may come to you and say, we want to see your application or your questionnaire to make sure you answered no. Where you can, comment on the form, print it out, answer no, and if you have, feel obligated to give some justification to your no answers, do so. Make notes on it so you can say no, we are not, especially that question about a school. No, we're not a school. We have no intentions of being a school. We are not an institution of higher education. IHE. Use that acronym for that phrase because the IRS recognizes that phrase. Institution of higher education. You are not an institution of higher education. That would be your Syracuse universities and your Ripon colleges and your MITs. Those are classical institutions of higher learning. You're not that, even if you have a focus on giving on some kind of educational focus for the tribe by giving scholarships or donations to students. That does not make you a school. That makes you sensitive to educational activities, but it doesn't qualify you as an IHE. All right, print out, make notes, keep it handy, keep it internal, right? Okay, I'm looking at the chat box to see if you have any questions. We're going through a lot of stuff here. that the IRS process of narrowing, it's an inverted pyramid, right? And we're going down that, getting more and more and more defined. We're eliminating some of these things. We are not a school. We are not a church or a faith-based organization. They don't use the word church because they don't differentiate between church and synagogue. They use the phrase faith-based, right? Faith-based organization. That way they don't have to say a mosque or a chapel or a church, or they don't have to distinguish between Catholicism and Buddhism. It's just a faith-based, right? That's the phrase. So you're not that, right? You are not that. You're not a faith-based organization, although you might be faithful, but you're not that. You're not an HMO. You're not any way, shape, or form a medical facility or a healthcare organization, even though you might think about giving donations to the tribe's health center for vaccinations, right? For COVID-19, or whatever manifestation COVID-19 is these days, for a vaccination program. That does not make you a medical facility. All right. Keep that in mind as you're moving forward. All right, let's keep going then. All right, let's look. Okay, we answered no to all those questions. We're narrowing the field down. We know now, going through all that, we should be able to move forward with filling out the short form as opposed to the brutal long form. List below are typical questions that are needed, attachments or all that kind of stuff for the application of the short form, which we hope we've qualified for. Here's some of the questions. Top left, provide that EIN. These are questions right off the form. You can go to the 1023 EZ and look at it yourself. I probably have a screenshot of it coming up. I just don't remember. Okay, provide your employer identification number. There's that EIN number. They want to have it. If you don't have it, it's going to stall your application and it might kick you over to the long form, because if you're the IRS person, you'd be saying, well, why don't they have that? That's standard operating procedure for an organization wanting to be a nonprofit. Also on the left column, provide your date of incorporation. Hopefully you've got that back from the state in writing, notarized your state of incorporation. That's when the clock started ticking, right? To pursue nonprofit statutes. Are officers or directors related to employees? Now that's something we not have talked about. Nepotism. Are officers and directors related to employees? Well, you probably don't have any employees, so the easy answer to that is no. But it is something you'll need to think about. You're not supposed to have there's not supposed to be nepotism between board members and staff. So in other words, if you were starting the organization and you had your 3 board members and you also had a part-time accountant or bookkeeper, or even a program director or executive director, part-time or full-time, paid or not paid, and that is the sister or brother or cousin, mother or father of one of your board members, you're going to have a conflict of interest, and that might be an issue. So from the get-go, let's avoid nepotism while you're starting off your nonprofit. All right. Now, they don't say anything about board members being related. It's just relation. That's a weird thing, I know. It's a weird thing between board and staff. It's probably been there for years, even though it's obsolete. Bottom left, provide a list of grants received, if any. Now, as you're not a nonprofit yet, though, so you probably aren't going to have anything listed there. You're going to have a none, for actual grants received. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have that's a double negative. Provide a list of grants. The answer is no. On the right side, we'll get to it. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Top right, provide your state-approved articles of incorporation. So not only did you provide the date, they want a copy of it. So there you go. You got to have to scan a hard copy, provide the date that you were approved, and then scan your hard copy, your notarized hard copy of your articles. Very good. Next question, bylaws. Same thing. You're going to have them in writing and probably have minutes with them from your board meeting approving them, and you scan and attach both documents as one for you. It says board of director approved bylaws. So you want to show them bylaws and then show that you have minutes from your meeting of your board of directors meeting, approving your articles, approving your bylaws, approving your name, et cetera, et cetera. You know, all of that in your initial meeting, because you're going to have to show the IRS, again, what they're looking for is to make sure that you have all the mechanisms in place to take it above being a hobby. You're not a hobby. You're a bona fide business. For the love of God, you've got articles of incorporation and bylaws, right? You've had a meeting, you've approved it. You may not have any revenue at the moment or any assets to fall back on, but that's a sign of newness. That's a sign of just getting started. So don't worry about that. Bottom right, in red, provide a narrative of your fundraising activities. They're going to ask you to describe what you're going to do, your sustainability, your capacity, your plan for fundraising. How are you going to, remember I talked about a multimedia approach of your creating revenue streams moving forward, which is a combination of federal, hopefully of federal grants, state grants, private individual contributions, planned giving, and other corporate donations and community, all of those things that we talked about, you want to integrate. Now, if you'd like some verbiage on that, send me an email or send Owista an email. She'll get it to me, and I'll give you what I have as far as some verbiage. If you're looking for something like that, we talk a lot about this in grant writing, so grant writing training, which is not what we're doing here a whole lot. So different training, but I have something that I can send. Oh, my screen went blank again. Sorry, gotta move my mouse every once in a while. All right. Bottom right, financial statements, if you have any, even in its most simple form. When you had that original board meeting, which you should have had, where you approved the minutes, or I'm sorry, you approved your name, you approved your articles, you approved your bylaws, you approved your fundraising program, you approved your board of director people names, and anything else you can think of with your startup. You should have some kind of a financial statement, even if it's all zeros, and probably going to be in that first meeting with just projections, as they call a pro forma financial statement, which means you're projecting income in the future. But remember, we want to keep it under the $50,000 threshold for the next 3 years, or at least the next 2.5 years. Keep it under the monetary threshold, because that was a trigger, right? And also make sure that you don't exceed the assets of $250,000 in your pro forma projections. So you want to keep it reasonable. And I would be hard pressed to come up with a new organization that wants to be a nonprofit that would be able to secure over $50,000 in gross revenue in their startup year, let alone have $250,000 in assets, unless they were given some kind of building donated to them, as a donation, and it's worth $250,000. I really don't see that happening, but this is where you need, right here, what we're talking about here is making sure that you have the fundraising plan, the multimedia approach, you can explain it, and you are not projecting more than the thresholds allow you to. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like managed growth. You're projecting, but you're aware of what the limitations are that would trigger a pushback from the IRS saying, man, okay, you're showing gross receipts of $25,000 each year for the next 3 years. That's fine. It's under the $50,000 threshold. But you were given a building worth $500,000, no strings attached. Net value, $450,000. You exceed $250,000, so we're going to fail you, so to speak, on the short form and kick you over to the long form, which is not where you want to go, because it's just going to be an endless process of questions and involvement from the IRS. You want to try to keep things simple and progressive, moving along. We're doing real good. We're coming to the top of the hour here, keeping an eye on the chat box, talking to myself a little bit, making sure I got all my bases covered. Here's the short form. I got a couple screenshots here, I think. Let's take a close look if you can, as close as you can, at this screenshot of page 1. I'll try to point out some things. Now, the very top is all the identification thing I talked about. 1023EZ on the left, middle column, it says streamlined application for recognition of exemption under 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. Yes, that's the form you want to use, right? That is the short form. All right, right underneath that big long line under the top line, and then to kind of almost the middle above part 1, you see a blue X. It says check this box to attest that you have completed the 1023EZ eligibility worksheet that we just went through. So they're asking you, kind of like under oath, they're asking you, did you do it? Did you complete it? And did you answer no to everything? You check that box to say, yeah, we got it. We understand. We are not an HMO. We are not a faith-based, et cetera, et cetera. Then underneath that, it says they're asking you again about the income and assets. The first one, have your annual gross receipts exceeded $50,000 in any of the past 3 years? And will it exceed $50,000 in the next 3 years? And you've got to answer no. Here it is again, right? It was on the questionnaire, and here it is on the actual application. Then the second question is about the assets, the $250,000, and you answer no to that. So they're asking you three blue check marks here, right? They're asking you again. Actually 4 times. Did you do the questionnaire? Did you answer no? Right? And then they're asking you on the 2 very most important questions, number 1 and number 2 and number 3, you did answer no, correct? Like you're under oath here. Yeah, we answered no to everything, and we did complete it. We have it if you want to see it. We did it. We kept notes. We documented. So that, getting back to that for a second, that questionnaire, I said download it, print it out, mark all the no's, make notes, annotate on it, put backup documentation if you can, if you think of it, on that questionnaire, attached to it, incorporate it into the minutes, have your board approve it. So it's incorporated into the minutes of that board meeting that you did the questionnaire, that you answered no to each and every question, and that the board is confirming that. So a little more deeper level of commitment that you did this. So if the IRS gets wishy-washy on you, you can say, not only did we do it, but I have notes, we have board approval that it was accepted with all no's, with the intention of having it as backup to the 1023EZ form. And that specifically the questions on income or on gross receipts and on assets, we answered no to that as well. It is not our intention to exceed those thresholds. With the intention of filing the short form, I would do everything. See, that's my compliance. I was a compliance director for 12 years, and that's my compliance coming out, saying you cannot over-document things like this. While it's fresh, while you're thinking of it, even this presentation, you went through this, we talked about it. This is part of the process. I would reference this training, and then on day 4, we specifically talked about this process, and the advice was given from an educational standpoint, not legal advice, by the way, but just advice from an educational standpoint and from some, best practices from someone who's gone through this more than once, that these are the things that you need to do to protect the program. So download it, print it, complete it, scan it if you wish to, put supporting documents with it, annotate it. In other words, take notes, verify it, approve it at a board level, keep it as one of your precious documents, right? Along with your articles of incorporation, because you never know with the IRS when they're going to come back to you. It's one of those weird things. It may be next month, next year, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years from now, and you want to have it. You want to have it hard copy with as much support documentation as you humanly can provide, or cooperatively with your colleagues and leadership provide. And this is how I would sell it to them, to protect the program, and keep it. So if the question ever comes up, it's there with your important documents. All right. So this is, again, back to reality here. Here's page 1. Part 1 is pretty straightforward. Name of the legal name of the organization, right off of your articles of incorporation, your mailing address, your bottom kind of in the middle of the page there, it says 9-digit number. That's your EIN number that you have. Hopefully you did do it. You do have the 9-digit EIN number that you can plug in there. Next to that, it's asking you about your tax year, whether you're on a fiscal year or a calendar year. Contact phone number, et cetera, et cetera. Down towards the bottom there of this screenshot, list names, titles, and mailing address of your officers, your directors. So you should have at least 3, no less, at least 3 there listed. Now, this screenshot doesn't cover the rest of the screenshot. Is just more spaces for name of addresses of your board members, but don't skip that. It's a requirement for nonprofit to have those board, and you need to have information there. Okay. Page 2 of the short form. It's only like 4 pages, so there's not a lot here to bog you down. But here's page 2, part 2, organizational structure. Hopefully you can answer these questions pretty easily. Number 1, to file this form, you must be a corporation, incorporate association, or a trust. So you'd want to most likely check corporation. You're incorporated. That's why you submitted articles of incorporation. Check the box to attest. This is number 2. Check the box to attest that you have organizing document necessary for the organizational structure indicated above. The instructions, what the instructions say is provide a copy of your articles, provide a copy of your bylaws. Well, that's the next one. Date incorporate. Number 3, date incorporated if a corporation or formed other than a corporation, and that would be the date that's stamped on your articles of incorporation. That is your birth date, so to speak, the birth date of the entity, right? So whenever the state put on there, that is your date. State of incorporation or other formation. For me, it'd be Florida. You put whatever, and for 305, it would be Florida. And for others, depending on what state you incorporated in, that's what you put down. That's number 4. Number 5, Section 503 requires that the organizing document must limit your purposes to 1 or more exempt purposes within the 501c3 classification. Check this box to attest your organization document contains this limitation. So this is where you would incorporate either in your articles, most likely a little bit in your articles, mostly in your bylaws, the actual verbiage that the IRS uses. It says, number 6, a 501c requires that your organizing document must not expressively empower to engage otherwise as an insubstantial part of the activities that themselves are not in furtherance with 1 or more exempt purposes. A lot of verbiage to say that your intent, you're not doing anything above and beyond the IRS's intention of what a nonprofit should be. So you'd answer yes to that. Check this box. Number 6, what we did. Number 7 requires that your organizing documents must provide that upon dissolution, your remaining assets will be used. Remember, I was talking to refresh your memory, back in the articles and in your bylaws, you have to state what's called a dissolution, which is a fancy word, a legal word for if the entity fails, what are you going to do with the income? What are you going to do with the assets you might have accumulated while you were up and running? And you've got to have a mechanism in place to give those monies or those assets back to the original donors or to another nonprofit, another 501c3, or thirdly, to the government, back to the government entity. Like if with a Native Learning Center, the Native Learning Center's facility originally came from HUD. It was paid for by HUD back in the day. So if we're going to give the building back, we would give it back to HUD. Going back to the original donating federal agency, if that makes sense. So you have 3 options there. What I would recommend doing here is making sure that you include that verbiage in your articles, in your bylaws, using the exact verbiage that the IRS provides. And you can get that you can either get it from me, you can send me an email, or Essential send it to me, or you can go to the irs.gov and look, type in dissolution verbiage. Dissolution. DISSOLUTION, dissolution, which means what are you going to do with the assets upon, hopefully you don't have to do this ever in your lifetime or in the entity's lifetime, but you've got to have the verbiage there. It's one of those CYAs of the organization, right? And the IRS requires it. Okay. So that's number 7. And then at the bottom, it says your specific activities. That's, I think, the next page. Yep. Your specific activities briefly describe the organization's mission. Here's where your mission, remember, very first thing we talked about on day 1, 3 sessions ago, was having a real firm, concise, not too wordy mission that everyone understands, because it's going to follow you through everything you do. And here we go. We're applying for IRS, 501c3 nonprofit status, and they're asking you point blank, what is your mission? You know why? Because they want to make sure that when you start, they're going to look at your fundraising. They're going to go back to the previous page. They're going to look at your fundraising narrative or blurb, whatever you put in there, and make sure that what you're doing, if you get into specifics, relates to your mission, right? They want to make sure that if you're going to generate products and services and charge a fee, if that's part of your fundraising initiative, that whatever you're selling or providing relates to your mission. So you want to make sure that you're not doing something that oversteps into the area of a for-profit, if that makes sense. You just want to make sure that everything ties back to mission. That's why they're asking, provide the organization's mission statement. And hopefully your mission statement isn't too wordy. It's pretty straightforward, doesn't give a whole lot of variables, because the more words and the more variables you put in your mission statement, the harder it is to interpret, and more interpretations can be generated from it, more loopholes, so to speak. And you don't want to give the IRS the opportunity to shoot holes through your program. So be careful from the beginning, as I mentioned, with your mission, because it follows you all the way through this process and indefinitely, in perpetuity, basically, for the life of the organization. All right, that's number 1. Number 2, there's an NTEE code, a 3-character NTE. You can Google that. And it's just they're just trying to narrow down even a little bit more what kind of area that you'll be focusing in. You can go to that that NTEE. You can just Google that NTEE code and figure out. I did a little bit of search. That's why it says B12, education, fundraising, and fund distribution. You can use that if you wish to. It's just a classification. There's nothing really for the IRS to hang their head on. They're just trying to narrow down if you're really going to be a legitimate business. Yeah, we've got a focus area, basically. Our main focus is education, and we also have fundraising and fund distribution. So we're going to collect contributions, and we're going to use those contributions to give donations to our main, our focus area, which might be the tribe, the tribe's education system, for example. It's primary schools or something like that. So you can use that. That's number 2. Number 3, to qualify for 501c3, you must be organized and operate exclusively to follow one or more of the following purposes. By checking the boxes below, you attest that you are organized and operate exclusively for that purpose. So they give you some options here. And most likely, we've narrowed, remember we went through the 26 questions. So you've narrowed out, you've eliminated a lot of these. I mark charitable because that's the biggest, broadest category, charitable nonprofit, which means you'll take contributions from just about any legitimate entity or private individual, as long as it's not in conflict with IRS regulations and rules. You are not scientific. You are not to foster national or intellectual amateur sports. That's something totally different. That's like the NCAA. Okay, you are not in the middle. You're not a religious or a literary organization. Your sole purpose is not to write and publish literary publications. All right, on the top right, yeah, you might have an educational focus, doesn't make you a school, but you might have a focus on education because it's important in every community, right? For nonprofits, it doesn't make you an institution of higher education, no. Or for testing public safety, or for the prevention for the cruelty of children and animals, even though you might overlap into that area, especially with children. And if you have an issue about, violence on the reservation, or uh, spousal or child abuse or elder abuse, that's fine. It does not make you that sole purpose of that charitable organization. It just might be a focus area, in the same way that you might have a focus area for the reduction of opioid usage or meth houses on the reservation. Does not make you, a drug, a pharmacy or anything like that. It's just a focus area. But most organizations would mark charitable and educational as their two focuses. And then number 4 gets into, well, the bottom says there of number 4 says, check this box to attend that you have not conducted and will not conduct activities that violate these probations. And those little marks are 5 or 6 areas that you have to avoid. For example, refrain from supporting or opposing candidates in political campaigns in any way. The reason being is you cannot use federal funds in any way, shape, or form to influence legislation or legislators on a federal level, on a state level, regional, tribal level too. You cannot use federal funds for lobbying. So that, those are some of the laws that are in effect. And any of us that have federal grants know that you cannot use federal funds for the influence of legislation in any way, shape, or form. So that's what they're talking about, some of the rules. All right, 5, do you or will you attempt to influence legislation? There it is, point blank. No, you're not going to do that. And then at the very, very, very bottom, do you or will you pay compensation of any of your officers, directors, and trustees? Now, here, this is a whole new area. This is the payment, the compensation of paying your board of directors a salary for being a board of director. Be careful how you answer this question. The go-to answer is going to be no, that they are not paid staff. Now, can you reimburse board directors with a stipend for travel expenses, or just a stipend for being a board member? Yes, you can do that, but they are not, board of director members are not to be salaried employees like staff. Your bookkeeper, your program director, your executive director, if you have or plan to have people in staff capacities, yes, they can be paid a wage and or a salary, and you can use funds from the nonprofit to pay those individuals. But you're not supposed to pay, by IRS definition, pay the board of directors for their time as a board of director or board of commission. You can reimburse them for expenses, whatever you want to call it, a stipend, a reimbursement, but you cannot pay them a salary. I hope that makes sense. So you answer the question, no. You are not. Do you or will you pay compensation to any of your officers, directors, or trustees? You're talking about board of director members. No. You answer no to that. If you answer yes, you're gonna send up red flags in the IRS. So during this review process, so answer it no. And in your bylaws, make sure that you do not use the word compensation when it comes to your board members, right? Remember, we talked about bylaws. We're going to have a section for board members and officers. Do not use compensation or salary or wages. Use any of those phrases or words when you're talking about board of director members and officers in particular. If you want to say anything, you can say that as needed, board members and officers will be reimbursed for expenses for travel, to and from for board meetings and board related activities, but don't get into the area of compensation for your nonprofit board leadership. You'll run into problems in your minutes. They'll be reviewed, and that'll be a red flag. And then, why did you say this in your minutes, but on your application you say no? So be careful here. with the way that you phrase things. Okay, did I skip one? Okay. Okay, we're at the end. Okay, great. We're fine. Yeah. You know, this is it. That's the end. Reinstatement after automatic revocation. You're not there. You're not nothing's been revocated. You know, that means failure. You're reapplying. That doesn't apply. We'll go right to the bottom there. Signature. That's it. You sign off. Probably your board chair would sign off on this and send it in. And that's it, folks. I mean, it's not, hopefully, over all that we've been doing over the past 4 sessions now, nearly time up, 4 sessions, you've got, all of these mechanisms in place to be able to sit down with this application. Don't try to do this online. Well, first, you can't do it online, first of all. It's not a fillable PDF. IRS isn't that advanced. You're going to have to print it out and do it the old school way, most likely. Print it out, fill it out, making sure that you've got all your backup, right? Like the questionnaire and the backup to the questionnaire that we just went through, your articles, your EIN number, your bylaws, your meetings, your board meetings with all of the approvals of everything. And when I say approvals, I mean approval of the name, approval of the EIN number, approval of the articles, approval of the bylaws, everything that the entity has done up to that time, approval of the questionnaire, approval of the application using the short form. All of that should be documented in your minutes because it's going to have to be provided when you send this package in. They're going to want to see that along with the approval of the fundraising, right? And the actual verbiage for the fundraising. All of those mechanisms in place when you sit down to fill this out, right? Then you fill it out. Now you've got all your documentations, all your mechanisms in place, all your approvals attained, all your articles from the state, etc., your name, acknowledgement of your name from the state as well, showing that you are a legitimate entity, etc., all of that in place when you sit down to fill this out and then you send it in. It'll increase your probability of streamlining your approval process 1,000 times. Now, having said that, if you have any questions on it, because the very last thing here is the sales tax exemption. And to get sales tax exemption, you need to have 501c3 status. You need to get the acknowledgement back from the IRS saying that you are a legitimate charitable 501c3 status organization. You need that letter because when you go to get the state sales tax exemption in whatever state you're in, I'm most familiar with Florida, but I think this QR code is for Kentucky, of all places. Same process. You're going to have to provide maybe some of the things that you're definitely going to have to provide your 501c3 determining a copy of it because that, as you know now, that process, you had to have everything else in place to get the determination. So who qualifies? Very top there, top left in blue. 501c3 organizations determined by the IRS to be exempt from federal tax. That would be you after their determination. What is exempt? Purchases and leases. What must be proven? The 501c3 status. All right. What documents are required? Basically, just the 501c3 determination, because to get that determination, you had to go through all those hoops that we've been talking about for 3.5 days. What is needed? Employer identification. You might have to send your EIN number in, and you might even have to send your articles. But you have all that. At this point, you have all that. That would be easy to do because you had to do it to get your 501c3 status. What else? Does the organization receive income from sales, lease, personal, real property, sale of taxable services? Yes. Provide a copy of your sales use and registration number if the state that you're in requires you to have those things. Florida does not. So, sales tax exemption for a nonprofit in Florida is pretty easy. You'd send in your 501c3 determination letter from IRS. You send it along with it, probably your articles, your EIN number. Those are documents you already have on file, and anything else that you might think is important. You send it in, and you should have sales tax exemption within a week or two. And there's probably a fee. Florida, I think there's a small fee for it. We're not talking a whole lot, but there is a fee. But anyway, that is it. That is all we got. Now you should be ready. Yeah, make it easy. Let me say this, having said all that for the past 4 days. If you have, this is my strong area of expertise. If you have any questions on the process of starting a nonprofit, or once you've started it, maintaining it, all those things we talked about, but to the next level, especially the fundraising and activities or any other logistical question. I do training on board of directors. That's coming up. Native Startup Learning Center. We're just talking about that. That's coming up in November. You might want to have your board of director members sit in on that training, But if you have, what I'm saying here is if you have any questions on it, send those questions to me directly or to the Native Learning Center. See Luisa's email there, her direct work email, and then my email above it, nextventureconsult@gmail.com. You can send it to me, Vince, just send it to Next Venture. That's the best way. Email, do it that. If you have any questions on any of these things that we've talked about over the past 4 days on the nonprofit, please send me a question. If you feel up to it, next week or on the 22nd, I think it is, we start a whole new series of programs on grants management, how to deal with federal grant funding, once you've received it. That means understanding the regulations, the federal regulations, and the other logistics of dealing with the management of federal funding. So join me for that through the Native Learning Center. That starts next week. I want to say the 31st. I think it starts. I want to say the 22nd, but that's today. So it's the 31st, and that's a series of 4 webinars. Please consider sitting in on that. Good stuff on grants management. But so I'm going to turn it back over with the bottom. We're coming close to 3:30 Eastern time, so I'm going to turn it back over to NLC staff to close it out. I want to thank everyone for today and for the past 4 days, actually, of going over this. And I wish you the best of luck if this is a new venture for you or if this was a refresher. I hope it served a purpose and helped you out. Again, if you have any questions, reach out to me. Otherwise, best of luck. We'll see you again at the next presentation.
Thank you so much, Vince. You did an amazing job. Thank you so much for doing 4 days worth of webinars. Truly, truly appreciate you. Please let us know how Vince did. I'm going to go ahead and launch the survey now. You can let us know what you would like to see more of next time. Anything more you would like him to touch up on, he would be more than happy to do so. His email is also in the chat box. Please feel free to email him, or if you would like to email myself regarding the materials for this webinar, please feel free to. Our next webinar is going to be August 22nd, Grant Writing When You Are Not a Grant Writer, presented by Marie Bonville, Tribal Housing and Education Consultant for Sunlight Armor Training, LLC. As always, registration is free, and it will be at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska.
I think it should be August 24th. Today's the 22nd.
Oh, goodness. Thanks,
Yeah.
Vince.
I think
my apologies.
I think that's Marie Dufour doing that. She's excellent, by the way, folks. She's really, really good. On the 24th.
Thank you for pointing that out, Vince. My apologies, everyone. It is August 24th. We'll make sure to fix that.
Yeah.
Please feel free to access this recording and any of our other recordings on our website at www.nativelearningcenter.com. Under the Cathedral Recorded Webinars tab, you'll be able to locate any of our webinars for up to 2 years. If you have any questions regarding a webinar recording, please feel free to email me. This webinar recording will be posted tomorrow morning, but before 9 a.m. You can also check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And please don't forget to check out our Hopathanga Native American podcast. You can find that on Simplecast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. You can also watch the whole video on YouTube if you are more of a visual person. As always, thank you everyone very, very much for joining us for today's webinar, and thank you very much, Vince. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.